I'm giving my last final speech, my commemorates speech. Boggles is the cameraman. We've got Skinner rocking the bod. We've got Adele. We've got Nate. And then we've got Deadpool chilling up top. All right. Cool. 3, 2, 1. Go. The speech I will be giving today is a commemorative speech about the life of J.R.R. Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien died 43 years ago, but his works are more popular than they were when he was alive. Tolkien's words are now more popular and widely read than at any point during his lifetime. What gives a man such incredible power to influence the world long after he leaves it behind? Having read some of J.R.R. Tolkien's words myself, I've been amazed again and again by this man's ability to communicate and to illustrate a world that is so different than ours. J.R.R. Tolkien appeals to his readers with imagination, with reason, and with an incredible sense of storytelling that merit him the title of one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. I will be going over how J.R.R. Tolkien sparks the imaginations of his readers with the novel The Lord of the Rings. I don't know if any of you have heard that. We'll then turn to how Tolkien appeals to readers with simplicity and clever language. We'll end by taking a look at how he defined this fantasy genre and spurred on many other writers. J.R.R. Tolkien inspires writers' imagination through his stories, largely through his series, The Lord of the Rings, and in this he has earned widespread acclaim. The Lord of the Rings is comprised of 3 volumes that follow the adventures of Frodo Baggins, who attempts to destroy an evil ring to save the world. More than 150 million copies of Lord of the Rings have been sold, and it exists in 38 languages, proving its widespread success. Even more so, the series has also produced several films which have all been blockbusters and have sold and made $1 million in revenue, and have spurred many actors' careers on to points to fame and than they ever experienced before. Lord of the Rings Middle-earth contains a world of orcs, dwarves, and wizards. Middle-earth also holds a deep influence on the fantasy genre. The influence is so great that the words Tolkienian and Tolkienistry have been recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary to describe certain types of genres. Before J.R.R. Tolkien, there wasn't really any popular fantasy writer that ended up being on the same level as him. The fact that he spent most of his writing career on The Lord of the Rings to provide a brand new, enriched world to writers that no one had ever really experienced before blew people's minds. Now that we've explored how J.R.R. Tolkien sparked the imagination of his readers with The Lord of the Rings, we'll talk about how J.R.R. Tolkien appealed to writers with his simplicity and clever language. He brought the impossible to life through fantasies and imagination, but also made it easy to understand with his language. In the 1930s, Tolkien started to write stories for his children. Started writing stories for children. These were based in the fantasy world he had created and later became known as Middle-earth. One of the stories he wrote was called The Hobbit. This was something he never intended to publish, but was convinced to publish it in 1936, and the book ended up becoming a bestseller. Tolkien never desired to become a published writer and wrote for the enjoyment of just entertaining himself. His early career of children's books largely affected his career as a whole by resulting in him using very simple language to describe very complicated scenes in his novels. A famous example of Tolkien's application of simple word choice and simplistic sentences is the fact that he used illustration very often during The Lord of the Rings, because it makes understanding the content easier for the reader. Examples of this in his text are, with winding horns winter hunted, and in the weeping woods wild and ruthless. Those are from, of course, the book Lord of the Rings. Unlike some writers who hit you like a bus with complicated word choice, this isn't true of J.R.R. Tolkien, who was more content with having the reader understand the novel for him to demonstrate his own vocabulary prowess. This resulted in him being one of the most popular writers of the fantasy genre, in my thoughts. Now that we've seen how Tolkien used simple word choice that he effectively communicates to people's imagination, we'll see how he affected this fantasy genre and other writers. For one to understand how much Tolkien affected the fantasy genre, just think how hard it is for any new writer to write an original fantasy novel without following in his steps. Seriously, every fantasy book either has a wise wizard that has no character development, or has young, naive people that have to learn rough lessons and are very often tempted, or there's some big evil bad guy that everyone has to stop to finish. This is all because of J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien wanted to not, whether he wanted to or not, created the rough draft and the main script of most modern fantasy books we read today because he was just the most popular and started essentially the whole genre. Basically, the idea of fantasy as we know it traces back so clearly to Tolkien that it suffices everything. And writers who tend to be different than Tolkien still end up being affected by him by the fact that they don't want to be like him. Tolkien, in a way, is Neil Armstrong. He was the first man to set foot on the fantasy genre. No matter what other people do, they will set foot on the moon and they will end up following his footsteps. Let me end by saying this. 43 years after his death, J.R.R. Tolkien's influence only continues to grow. Because Tolkien appeals to the imagination that no one else did before him. Because Tolkien wants people to understand his books and not struggle with trying to understand what he's trying to say, but they'd rather be able to put themselves in the novel itself. With such versatility, J.R.R. Tolkien, as far as many other writers, and wins a place among the most influential writers of the 20th century. One could argue that J.R.R. Tolkien is the best writer in the history of the world that has ever existed. Throughout his works, he continues to captivate writers through his imagination. He continues to inspire kids and adults of all different ages to think differently of the worlds that he imagined, such as me. I encourage you to read his books. Done. And you can show everyone again. Boggles, Skinner, Adele, Nate, and Deadpool. Good. And